Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's always good to be back in Calgary. This is my third time here. Last time, I think, was maybe 2012, something like that. And that turned out to be the origin of the Calgary Workshop, which has been kind of the signature summary of my big toe and the things that I talk about and the things that I've written about. And whenever anybody says, well, where can I find out more about this? It's like, go listen to the Calgary Workshop. So it's kind of famous all on its own. So it's really nice to be back here. And of course, thanks to Beth and her husband Dave, the probably two most perfect hosts on the planet. It's always a lot of fun to come here and be pampered by those two. So today, as I understand it, and as I heard from Beth in an email, this is going to be a satsang. Now, when I heard that, first thing I did was Google satsang to find out what in the heck was that. So I found out it was kind of sort of a Q&A, question and answer, sort of just let's all kind of hang together for a while and share, the things you know, the things I know, and just discuss anything that's on your mind. So I didn't come today with a presentation, although I'm willing to cover any subject that you might want to cover, because I understand that most of you are old hands at this, and you got to watch the Calgary Workshop from 2012 and probably any other of the something like 320 videos that I have on YouTube. So you're all supposedly very familiar with the work, and I don't need to go over all of that again. We'll just kind of answer your questions. Now, to begin with, nothing is off the table. And in a Q&A like this, sometimes people feel a little concerned about asking the question they really want to know the answer to. They want to be polite. They don't want to ask questions that seem like maybe they're rude or hard questions or embarrassing questions or that sort of thing. And I want to tell you that there are no such questions. If it's something that is a sincere question that you have, then ask it. And if you are afraid that it might sound a little hard or harsh or rude or something, don't worry about it. So there's nothing that's off the table. There's nothing impolite. As long as it's a sincere question of yours, then it's a good question for you to ask here today. So if you want to, question me on, where does all this come from? How do you know any of this is true? Those kinds of things. Feel free to ask me whatever it is you want to ask. Well,
I just wanted to ask you something. When I was at TMI, one of the experiences I had, I don't know if I've shared this one with you, but I was in the lab, and I was doing kind of whatever my best, highest and best good was. And I asked, when I teach the workshop, there's 5 questions that we do, like who am I, where was I before I was here. And so I asked that question, and as I asked that question, in my mind I kind of got the visual of this little spark coming out of the blackness. That was the answer to the question, who am I? And then after that, I realized that little spark was actually my consciousness, and I was circling my mother in this lifetime. And that spark of consciousness was actually supervising the construction and holding the field together for my infant body. So that seemed a pretty complicated process to me. So in my mind, I asked the question, well, how do I know how to do this? And then I was shown where I was a spark of consciousness, and I only held together 2 little cells of creation. And when I could hold the field for that, then I could be more complex, and it kind of sped through really quickly until I was at the point where I could hold together the trillions of cells that make up a human body. And then it kind of showed me after that, then as your consciousness develops, then you can pull together like planets and the solar system. Does that fit with some of your experiences?
Okay, well, first of all, when you have these sorts of communications, and often, sometimes the communications are in words, sometimes they're in pictures, sometimes they're in combination of pictures and thoughts. It's kind of just a knowing. You're getting the information telepathically. And the information you get is going to be in terms of metaphors. Metaphors that mean something to you at that time. So we learn to read between the lines more than we worry too much about actually, the content of what we got. We want to know, well, what does it mean? It's very much the same with dreams. When you wake up with a dream, most of your dreams are in terms of symbols and metaphors. And it's not so much you worry about those symbols or metaphors as what they mean to you. Okay, so your experience was that, if I can put it into different terms, that one, you were consciousness, and that your point here was to grow, was to become, was to embrace larger and larger pictures as you were able. And that's profound just by itself. And the imagery you had with the sparks and the integration that occurred with your mom were just kind of personal to you. So yes, that was it's a fairly common set of experiences, but everybody will experience it differently. So again, it's not the experience that's really the thing, as it is the sense of you are primarily consciousness. You are primarily the light, the spark, not the body so much. You're the thing that makes the body go. That's with you, trying to make the cells go together. Well, that's not literal. You don't actually put the cells together and do that sort of thing, but you are the animation behind that body. You're the consciousness. And your job here is to grow and to get bigger and bigger pictures. Because the real job you have here is to become love. And you can't do that if everything is self-referential. You see, love is about other. So that's the sense of getting these bigger pictures. But I suspect that many of you in the room have had a very similar kind of experience. But it would have been completely different, unique to you, unique to your metaphors, but something that shows you that there is a bigger picture, that you're a very important part of it, and that you're connected to everything else, and that love and growing up and evolving is the answer. So probably almost everybody in here has had some sort of vision, sound, picture, feeling of that, because that's the core thing about why we're here. So it's a very core experience, very common. Not it's common in the fact that you were sparks and the rest of it. That's just yours, but common in the meaning of it. Okay, now you can talk about anything. You want to talk about science, you want to talk about the male-female. I was asked to do something about that. You want to talk about your personal experiences, what things meant to you. We're going to do a little healing and a little remote viewing later, and I can talk a little about how to do that. What are the techniques you can use? How does it work? What are the, what's the logic behind it? How is it that you can heal somebody else or yourself? And mechanics, so all of those things, everything's on the table.
So, I don't know, lots of people talk about having, like hypnosis to go between lives or have some experience of, planning out this existence. Do you subscribe to that at all? That your consciousness is kind of like, when you die, then you're in this in-between state, and then and kind of planning out another kind of existence for itself, like physical manifestation or manifestations, I guess.
Okay, question, and I'm going to try to repeat your questions because I've been asked to, because otherwise this mic won't pick up your questions, and this little mic here wired to me won't pick up your questions, and it'll be odd just listening to me to give answers if nobody knows what the question was. So I'll try to repeat that, or if you speak up, this actually will pick it up some. And they have some, they're going to pick it up to some extent, but so I'm going to try. And basically the question, if I can narrow it down to just a couple of words, was does the My Big Toe work have a position or say anything about reincarnation, past lives, living multiple what I call experience packets? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. And it's not because that's a belief of mine. It's not because I thought that was a good idea, or even that it's kind of comes very strongly out of Eastern culture, but because it's a logical necessity for the My Big Toe theory. And if you don't have that, then there's this big gaping logical problem in the theory that it doesn't work, you see. So that's just part of the logic of the larger reality is, yes, indeed, we are consciousness. We're not bodies. We're consciousness. We are playing this body in a virtual reality. So think of the metaphor of you playing a video game, virtual reality, multiplayer, role-playing video game. Okay? And you, the player, are the consciousness. And the player that you're playing, I'm not sure the player that you're playing, that's confusing. You're the player, but the character that you are playing, your elf, your barbarian, you know, your Sims character, whatever, that avatar is just computed. That avatar has no consciousness. It's just a computed form that looks like whatever, an elf or a person or something. And you're the consciousness. That character does nothing if you don't give it instructions. You tell it to stand up, sit down, move, do this, do that. You make choices for it. And otherwise, it is just ones and zeros in a computer until you give it some choices that you make to execute. Okay, so if you're consciousness, then right away we have the fallout of that you're immortal. Right? When your elf dies, it's really no big deal, is it? Because you're the player and you go resurrect your elf, or you get another elf, or you make that elf come back because you don't want to lose its experience. And the games don't make you start over. They let you start from where your character dies. So in any case, why is that? Well, that's because if the game gave you one character and nothing else, it wouldn't be a very interesting or informative game. You wouldn't learn much. It would be very difficult for you to actually understand how the game worked. Because in most of these games, well, at least in World of Warcraft, your characters often don't live very long, particularly at the beginning, because they don't know how to function very well, and there's all kinds of monsters out there that they don't understand how they need to approach. So the one shot at existence, at consciousness, when consciousness is the one making the choices, the avatar, the body, is the one defining the experience. Okay. That doesn't compute. Just do that once and then walk away from the game, start over. The only way that you can learn is cumulatively. Learning is a cumulative function. You have to go to kindergarten before you get to first grade, and first grade before you get to second, and you don't start with calculus, you start with arithmetic, and then you got to go through algebra, and then maybe you get to calculus. But learning, you have to learn what's at step A before you can learn at what's the step B, because step B learning requires the knowledge that you got at step A. So learning has to be an accumulative thing. And what we're trying to learn to do here is grow up, become love. And that's not easy. Get rid of fear, get rid of ego, get rid of our beliefs. And that's hard enough that one lifetime just would not be of any value. And what do you do as a consciousness when your avatar dies or goes away? Retire? You've had your one shot? See, that doesn't make any sense. So if this consciousness evolution is what we're about, to make sense, you have to be able to log back in and have another go at it, and log back in and have another go of it. So that's reincarnation. I call it just an experience package. You need experience. And you don't want to play the same character all the time, because that character has limitations. That character, only lives in one part of the world with one family, is either male or female, one race. It just has a lot of restrictions that your experience set now will only be with that set of restrictions. And that's not a very broad experience base. You want to experience everything. You want to experience as much as possible to help you grow. So you want a different avatar every time, because that gives you the experience base that you need. So that's kind of why reincarnation is a fundamental part of this, because the whole theory of MBT is that we are consciousness. We're here to evolve the quality of our consciousness. We do that by becoming love. I'm skipping lots and lots of logical steps, but since you all are old hands at this, then I can do that. So this is more of a kind of an advanced group that we don't have to go into those details. But if any of you are missing details and want to go back and understand them, just ask that question and we'll go back and fill those things in. So reincarnation just turns out to be a logical necessity of the evolution of consciousness. Okay? As is the fact that we have this virtual reality with these avatars that we play. That's another logical necessity for consciousness. Otherwise, it's difficult to get experience. That is, experience with good feedback. Experience where there's so many decisions, so many choices that have to do with our quality. And we get hundreds of those every day. So we have lots and lots of opportunities. So that's why we even need this virtual reality and a avatar for us to play, because that gives us a situation where we have a lot of very poignant, very ripe choices to help us grow up. So that's the point. Now, if you want to go a little more into what is this whole process like? Well, okay, we'll start with you as consciousness and an avatar. You're the body. That's the avatar. You're not the body. You run the body. You make choices for the body. Okay, the body gets old and dies, and why does that happen? Because in this virtual reality, there's a rule set. You can't have a virtual reality without rules, and our biology, our science, our physics, all of that is the result of the rule set, the rules for the virtual reality. World of Warcraft and The Sims and all the rest of them, they have their rule sets, and you can only do what the rule set supports. And that's the way it is here. So the rule set supports our bodies getting but so old before things wear out. You get a disease, whatever, and the body dies. The consciousness now then needs to some way connect up with another consciousness, another avatar, so that it can again play its role-playing game again. All right, what's the process there? Well, as the avatar dies, the consciousness is unsure, of course, what's going to happen. And the reason for that is the consciousness is not this all-knowing thing that understands that it's playing an avatar. The consciousness has been completely immersed in this experience and just this experience. So the consciousness tends to believe that it is the avatar. We think we are this person with the body, and that somehow consciousness is in our head, made by a brain, that sort of thing. And that's not the case. The brain really processes nothing, stores nothing, computes nothing. It's just a virtual brain, just like the virtual body. All of that processing and storing is done in consciousness. You're the choice maker, you see. But you've known nothing but the experience you've gotten through your avatar. So you identify with the avatar. So you find yourself, after the avatar dies, that you are someplace else, some other reality. And to begin with, it depends on how much you understand how the reality works. You are probably a little concerned in what's going on and where am I and why is it like this and so on. And there's this transition virtual reality that you basically wake up in. And if you need a lot of hand-holding and reassurance, then there'll be those there to hand-hold and reassure you. You know, if you are like the average person, then there may be relatives to greet you and so on, but that's all constructed by the system for the purpose of you just relaxing, accepting, and letting go. And your experience here then begins to fade like a dream. At first it's very clear, you've just left it, and then eventually it kind of gets fuzzier and fuzzier until now you're kind of in this new place and you're looking around and you're interacting and you're doing things there and you're meeting Uncle Fred and Aunt Susie and you're distracted, and that's the whole point. Eventually, or I shouldn't say eventually, as you let the old lifetime go, you begin to reintegrate with what I call your individuated unit of consciousness. In the books that gets an abbreviation of IUOC. So you get to, as your awareness, your awareness is the avatar awareness, that starts to fade, and as that fades away, you kind of wake up as, or become aware as, your individuated unit of consciousness. That's like your parent, that's what you were a part of, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So as you relax and as you accept, you begin to say, all right, now what? Well, what is there to do? Well, what's there to do? You have a mission, you have a job to do, and that's to evolve. The fast track, the best way to evolve is to be in a virtual reality. So you get this idea, I need to get back into the game. And you now aren't the body that you were. You now are the individuated unit of consciousness. Now this individuated unit of consciousness has created these, well, I've used my terminology, free will awareness unit. That was your consciousness playing the avatar with your free will. So you decide that, okay, we'll get back in the game, and then there's a little review that says, well, what do I need to learn? Now, if you're just kind of starting out, the review is hardly anything at all because you just need experience. If you have been around the block a few times, there's things you need to work on, specifically challenges that you need areas to grow up, because you don't just grow up every facet of yourself at the same time. Some things you're very grown in and some things not so much. So you decide to pick something that will help you grow up. Now it may be just you, or it may be you and others that you do this with sometimes. Just depends on where you are in this cycle and what is best for you at the time. Well, once you pick that, now we'll go back to the IUOC. The IUOC then partitions off a part of itself. It's consciousness, it's you. It's the collective you. It'll partition off a part of itself that does not have any intellect involved in it. There's no memory of past things. It's just the potential of that IUOC. In other words, this IUOC is evolving. as you evolve. It evolves from the choices you make. And as it grows up, now the next group of the next free will awareness unit that it partitions off with none of its intellect, just its quality, its essence, if you will. Then that partitioned off piece logs into the game, starts again with another avatar. And because there's no memory there, the data that it gets, the experience that it gets starts with that avatar. That's why it identifies completely with that avatar. It doesn't identify with anything else because it doesn't come with any memory of anything else. So then we start another lifetime. Now this individuated unit of consciousness has done this thousands of times. And every time this process takes place, it takes the evolution gained or the evolution lost, and it incorporates that into the whole. So it's evolving, it's growing up, and its technique, its way it goes about growing up is to have these interactions in these virtual reality entropy reduction trainers called this physical reality, this physical universe. So that's kind of how the whole system works, and that's kind of why the system's doing this. It's growing up. So why does it need these virtual realities? It's because here we have experience that has ramifications. There's consequences to everything you do. Every decision you make carries consequences. And in those consequences, you can learn, was that a good decision? Was that a good choice? Did that move me closer to this bigger picture, this becoming love that, Beth talked about? She was shown that this is really the point of all of this. And if the answer is no, then you're either wasting your time, or if the answer is hell no, then you're probably de-evolving. You've made poor choices. So now you're going backwards because you've made choices on the side of fear rather than on the side of love. Whereas if you didn't have this virtual reality, you would have a bunch of individuated unit of consciousness just passing data back and forth. There's really no context there for consequences. Very few consequences, right? Imagine you're in a chat room with 100,000 other chatters, no rules. What are you going to learn? Not a whole lot. There's not a lot of traction you can get on your interaction and the value of your choices and the size of your picture. That's difficult. So you get into this virtual reality where every choice matters. Every choice has feedback. Every choice connects with some other being and affects that other being in some way, for better or for worse. And the things that they do affect you. And you have to, those are your choices of how they affect you. You see? So that's why we're here. That's why we need reincarnation. That's kind of why that cycle goes that way. And it's just part of the process of consciousness trying to evolve itself. So it's a necessary, logical part. And if it stopped there, it would sound like mostly conjecture. But if we take this logic that has reincarnation in it as not really its centerpiece or anything, it's just another part of the logic that flows from the beginning to end, and we get down more toward the end, and we realize that the same concepts, the same ideas, the same understandings that explain all of this metaphysics, if you will, all of this consciousness theory and what consciousness is and where it comes from and how does it work and why are we here and who are we, it does all that. Well, down at the end of this logic chain, it also does better physics. It explains a lot of the should we say, mysteries that science has run into. Things that science just knows are odd, but doesn't have any idea why they're like that. You see, there's a lot of these paradoxes that turn up in physics. Matter of fact, everything that's fundamental in physics is a paradox. Everything. Where does time come from? Where does mass come from? What's the origin of charge? See, all these are the fundamental things of physics: mass, charge, space, time, spin. There's a list, not a really long list, but all the rest of physics is how these things interrelate with each other. You see? How does motion through space of a charge relate to magnetism or, other things? They're all interrelated. So all the basic stuff is, nobody knows where any of that came from. It just is. And if you ask a physicist, well, it just is. We just start with that. Well, what's that mean? To me, that's mysticism. When you have no causality, it just is, and we start from that, almost sounds religious, doesn't it? That's mysticism. So a lot of these things in science are really not so hard that we call it hard science at all. It's a belief. It's a mystical beginning. Plus you have things like, why is the speed of light a constant, and why is the double slit experiment so weird that does strange things that in a material objective reality shouldn't act like that. And there's lots of things like that. Tunneling is another effect where particles end up places where they shouldn't be able to go. And the list goes on and on and on in modern physics. There's lots of these paradoxes that physicists just scratch their head and say, oh, weird science. But now this long chain that starts with a logic of consciousness basically ends up giving you answers to physics that make sense and are entirely logical from this other derivation. So then that tells me that this logic chain, which includes reincarnation as part of the process, well, that gives it pretty good credibility. Doesn't necessarily make it true. Science isn't like that. Science isn't so much interested in proof as it is interested in evidence. This idea of can you prove it is really kind of a silly idea in science. Nothing's proved. Everything is based on what's the evidence for it. Everything these days is a theory, not a law. Back in Newton's time, they came up with something and they thought it was pretty good, so they called it a law because that was a law of nature, and it was just like that. And then, of course, 50 years later, they find out that the law isn't quite right. Matter of fact, it's it's not right at all. It's not really fundamental. It just shows a kind of a subset of relationships. It's not really a fundamental thing of nature. And then we realize that it's pretty arrogant actually to call things laws, because we don't know what the future will bring us in information. Things that now seem like they're done and complete will maybe only be subsets in the future when more information comes in. So science doesn't talk about laws anymore, they talk about theory. So you have the theory of quantum mechanics and the theory of relativity and the theory of whatever the science is, because it's all open-ended. And
do you think the underlying rule set changes over time, like as they discover or figure new things out? Then is it actually just discovering it, or is it are we adapting?
Well, both is going on. The question was, does the rule set change? Is it a fixed thing, or does it adapt to kind of what we do? And the kind of the main answer to that is it is a fixed thing. It is what it is. The rule set created the virtual reality. So our virtual reality isn't programmed, it has evolved. So you start with a rule set and initial conditions, and you punch the run button in the computer and you let it evolve and see what happens. Okay, so that's the digital Big Bang taking place inside a computer. When the run button hits, time starts to increment in the simulation and things happen, right? Immediately you start with a little ball of plasma under high temperature and pressure, and it expands, and you know the rest of the story of the Big Bang story, and then you end up with planets, and then you end up with solar systems like ours, and And then you end up with life, and then you end up with us. So that's all running in a computer. It's evolving because of an initial condition set, which was like the high temperature pressure in the plasma, and then the rule set that says how energy gets passed around. Okay. So that rule set is why we are the way we are. It's our universe. It's, you know, all the things that make us us, because it's evolved to be just like this. So you're not going to change that rule set much. That's the fundamentals of nature, if you like, here in this virtual reality. Just like the rule set in World of Warcraft is the fundamental nature of the World of Warcraft rules. And the elves in World of Warcraft can only do as much as that rule set allows them to do. And same here. So then what do our bodies do? Our bodies then are a way of constraining our consciousness to make choices within the possibilities of the rule set. So the rule set then provides context to the choice, meaning for the choice. So the rule set isn't going to change a whole lot. Now, can the rule set modify a little bit on the edges or in the details? Sure, it could, but not to a large degree, because if you change the rule set, then you kind of change the whole simulation. But yes, it can change a little bit, and we got things that the people would maybe say are in the rule set. Like in my books, I talk about psi uncertainty principle. That's not so much a rule as it is company policy, and things like that can change. So it's not that we are creating the rule set as we go. The rule set is there, is why these avatars are here and this virtual reality is here. We're basically exploring it, understanding it, and the more we understand it, the better we can compute what's going to happen. You see, if we understand physics and atoms and so on, and then we can work that up to the next level of chemistry, and we understand chemistry and how things bond and so on, and then we can predict things. We can build things. We can engineer things with our understanding, because we know how the rule set works. We know if we do this, that'll happen, because that's part of the rule set. That's our science. So it's not real changeable. Maybe only in the details. Little details that don't affect the whole thing very much. Now we got some hands up. Okay, we've covered enough material that we're starting to generate more questions.
Can you go over one more time how to point consciousness?
Point consciousness. Okay. The question is, how does one reach point consciousness? Point consciousness is a term that I made up. I made up a lot of terms in my books. And the reason I did is that many of the old terms had a lot of emotional baggage to it. So that I talked about, first thing you have to do is get to nirvana or something. That would have created more trouble than it was worth, because it carries a whole lot of other baggage with it. So we talk about point consciousness. Point consciousness is simply where you exist as a point of awareness, a point of consciousness. There's nothing else. So that means it's black. You're not seeing anything. You're not hearing anything. You're not feeling anything. It's like you're floating as a point of awareness in the void. The void is just the absence of everything. Okay. Particularly for us, that means the absence of sense data. We don't hear, see, smell, feel anything. We're just aware that we exist. And that's it. Well, that is a very handy state from which to begin all the rest of your adventures in consciousness. And that's one that we tend to work on first, to where we can reach that state and stay in that state basically as long as we want to. But the question was about how to attain it, not really what it is, but I thought I would define it first. Point consciousness is actually a very lovely place. When you experience it, it's usually, I'm not ready to leave yet. Let me just hang out here a while longer. It's a very nice, pleasant, relaxing sort of place. It's not something you have to have special technique to experience. The key to experiencing point consciousness is to let go, not to acquire. It's not that you have to acquire a new way of meditating or acquire new mantra or a new whatever or new skills. You just have to let go of all the stuff that keeps tugging you to, to be here, to be feeling, seeing, smelling, hearing. You have to let go of all of that sense data. Well, this is the way you start almost everything interesting in consciousness, is by letting go of this reality, all that sense data. So what we have to do is learn to first relax. Second, stop the chatter in our minds, because our minds are constantly chattering, mostly from the intellect, about what are we going to do later? What is this experience going to happen? Am I going to run into my guides? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? And am I doing it right? Am I really in a good state here? Do I need to do it differently? And yada, 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 yada. The mind just keeps cranking on and on and on with this chatter. And you just have to let that go. And meditation techniques are basically techniques for letting that go. And that's all they are. So there are hundreds of meditation techniques, many of which you wouldn't even call a meditation technique, like listening to music. And here's an instance where you let it go real easily because you're not trying to, and that's when you read a book. When you get engrossed in a really good book, you're not seeing, hearing, thinking, smelling, anything else going on in your environment. You've let all of it go and you're just immersed in the book. You're hearing, you're seeing, smelling the things that the author's telling you about in the book. And the same is true for a movie. When you're watching a movie, yes, when you first sit down and a movie first starts, there's all these people around you and there's little noises and this stuff, and you're perfectly aware of that. But once you become engrossed in it, all that disappears. Unless there's just something really glaring or loud or something that kind of brings you out of it for a second and you go, oh yeah, baby cried or something, and then you let it go and you go back. Well, we do that naturally. It's not hard to let go of all that sense data. Nobody had to teach you how to do that. All you had to do is read a book, watch a movie that captured your attention. You see, it's just that easy. But when you watch a movie and read a book, now your attention is fixated on something else. And we'd like to let that go too. You see, we want you to get to that place where you've let go of all the sense data and not be filling it up with something else. Just let go. Well, when you do that, you don't have any sense data. When you don't have any sense data, you're floating in a void. Because otherwise, it's sense data that feels you sitting, is aware of your sitting, is aware of the sound of the traffic outside, is thinking about, am I doing it right? So you just let that intellect sit down and be quiet. Doesn't have to read a book, doesn't have to be being fed anything. And that's point consciousness. So it's not really so hard to do. It's like reading a book without a book. It just takes practice, because mostly our minds are just jabbering all the time. Busy, busy, busy. And meditation is the tool set for learning to do that.
But how do you learn to move beyond? So I can get to point consciousness, no problem with Focus 15 or something like that. But how, when you read your book or Bob and Rose book or whatever, and I know certain people have out-of-body experiences, certain people don't. But, like I dream, I have vivid dreams, like last night, lucid dreams where I can control my, like I kind of energy body and I fly around. But when I get to flow of consciousness, and whether you're reading your stuff or Bob's stuff, but how did it happen for you? How did you move beyond point consciousness to where you could actually explore it? I don't know if this is a bad question or not.
Well-
But how did it just come naturally?
Okay, well, I think the answer to that's probably yes. I had been, as a child, taught out of body, and that's in my first chapter of my book, first chapter, first section. And I then let that go. So, but all the time I was growing up, even after the out-of-body experiences stopped, I was aware that there was these other dimensions, other entities in those dimensions. I had friends that lived in those dimensions, not necessarily like children who have playmates, but just I could, now I would say maybe drop into an altered state and make a connection, ask questions, get information, get senses of things, and so on. It just seemed natural. And I was probably a teenager before I figured out that not everybody did that all the time. That was unusual. So I kind of had this sense of just letting go of everything, making a connection with something else. And of course, when you make that connection, all the physical stuff just drops away. And it may only be for 30 seconds or a minute or something, but it just all drops away. And you don't even notice that it drops away. Just like you don't notice it when you read the book. It just disappears. So that was easy. And then when I got connected in 1970, early 70s, 72, 71 with Bob Monroe, and our deal was that Dennis and I would do science for him and try to come up with some way that we could have this out-of-body experience become more widespread rather than just the people who happened to have it happen to them. And we were working on that, and Bob was going to teach us to do what he did, to go out of body on demand whenever you wanted to. So he had us listen to some of the tapes that you've listened to. And of course, the first tape that he had, and probably was for a year or so, it was only Focus 10. That was it. He didn't branch off until some later with 12 and 15 and so on. So we did that, and it just seemed that that's the way it worked. By the time we got to 10, we weren't here anymore. We weren't in the physical reality anymore. So it was just that easy. It wasn't much of a struggle. And if you're not here, then where are you? Well, mostly I ended up in point consciousness. That's just where it was. After Bob said, let go, let go of everything. Well, yeah, I just let go of everything and it was gone. So there I was in the void in point consciousness. And then Bob would have us do other things. Go explore, go do this, go to the future, come back and tell me what the headlines are going to be 3 weeks from now, go read the numbers on the board, et cetera, et cetera. He'd lead us through all kinds of other things to do. So it just seemed from that experience that it was the natural thing to do, is when you want to access outside of this physical reality, you simply drop everything else off, go to point consciousness, and from there, do whatever it is you want to do. So point consciousness to me became the doorway. That was like stop number one. You just go there, and from there you can heal, you can travel, you can remote view, you can access databases, you can go visit past lives, you can look at future probabilities, and everything else then was just a matter of intent. Okay, and later the way I realized why that works that way is that you have to make a connection in the world of consciousness at the being level, not at the intellectual level. If you make all your connection at the intellectual level, you're very limited into where you go and the kind of experience you have. You have to actually be there, not just think about being there. Now this is going to get a little hard to maybe translate into your own experience, but You have power in your healing or in your remote viewing or in the data you get if it comes out of your being level. The intellectual level is what gets in the way, is what second guesses, is what basically ruins the experience for the being level. So it's important to tell the intellect just to sit down and be quiet. It's not needed here. And when I need you, I'll ask. And you do need your intellect, because when you're interacting at the being level, it's not that you can't think. It's not that your cognitive ability is gone. We just connect our cognitive ability to our intellect. And we begin to believe that our cognitive ability is nothing other than our intellect. But you have cognitive ability at the being level. At the being level, you can think. But you're not doing analysis. You're not judging. You're not doing anything but just experiencing and interacting with that experience. All the things our intellect generally does, those functions are just basically shut down. But you still can think. You can say, well, okay, I'm going to do this healing. And you can bring up whatever your tools are for healing, and you can do that, and you can, go places, see things, whatever. So all of your ability to make choices are still there. But you no longer are analyzing those choices. When you're healing, you don't think, well, should I do this or should I do that? And should I do these other things? It just happens. You're just connected at the being level, and everything happens the way it does and the way it should at the time to work as good as it can work. So you don't have to analyze. You get in data. You can decide whether you're going to do this or do that or something else. You can decide what even is the best way to approach things, or what should I do next. But you're not judging it. It just is, and you're just interacting with it. Now, I've probably confused most of you with that, because it's hard for most people to separate their intellect from their awareness and thinking ability at the being level. Okay. Now, as you grow up and as you evolve, you will find that you begin to live more and more out of the being level and less out of the intellect. And eventually you realize that there's really not two things going on here. There's not you, the intellect, and you at the being level. There's just you. And now you're one whole integrated being. And all of your choices and all of the things you do are basically coming out of your being level. Okay, so that's, maybe we can get into a definition of like ego, because people also, we talk about ego, and ego is the sense of I. Okay, it's the sense of yourself, it's the sense of your identity. And everybody will say, well, isn't that a good thing? Don't you have to have some sort of sense of who you are and what your identity is, and isn't that ego, and isn't that necessary? But no, not in the classical way, and this would be the Freudian way of looking at this. And that is that I define ego as your awareness in the service of fear. Okay? Now, Freud basically did that too, except he didn't realize that fear was what the ego was in service of, because he was an experimentalist. He just talked to people and collected data, and he saw that everybody had this thing he called the ego, the sense of self. And because everybody had it and everybody seemed to be doing all right, then it became a normal, functional thing that everybody had to have. That was just the way he looked at it. He didn't see it as being a dysfunctional part of individuals. Well, most of us, including all the people Freud talked to, no doubt, are dominated by fear, dominated by this ego, their beliefs, but it all starts at fear. Fear is at the root of all of it, and that's what makes them go. That's what winds them up. That's where the choices come from. So if you are dominated by fear, then you are dominated by ego, and you probably have a lot of beliefs too. They just all run together, but fear is the root cause. So if you go look across society, you'd say, well, that's normal. Everybody's like that. Everybody seems to be doing all right, so it's normal, healthy thing. Yeah, everybody needs to have an ego. But it's, you know, it's not quite like that. It's really dysfunctional to have this thing called ego. Now, Freud had something else he called superego. And he didn't see that very much, and when he did, it just kind of lasted for short periods of time, but that's when his people that he talked to, really it wasn't about them, it was about somebody else. It was about other. Okay, so the superego was when you are, I guess you might, some people might associate like with a religious thing. Not about self, it's about whatever's bigger than you are. Some people would just say that it has to do with, caring for other people more than you're really, at the time, caring for yourself. But then most of us shift back to that caring for ourselves. You know, we just do that for a little bit of time and then we leave that. That's just something we kind of go out and do. So that's the love part of us. That's caring about other people. Love is about other people, not about us. If it's about us, it's really not love. And we talk male, female later. I know Beth wanted to talk about that, so somebody will ask that question and we'll talk about that. And we have plenty of time. We've got 2 days to sit here and talk. So everybody's questions, we'll get to those and we'll go on. So that's, kind of the way it is with ego, with the point consciousness. With the point consciousness, you need to be there at the being level. You just are there and you just do experience, but you're not making any of your choices or any of your thoughts are not fear-based. See, that's really the key. They're not fear-based. So when you get out of body and the first thing you see is some two-headed monster with fangs or some sneaky person, sliding around in the shadows in your bedroom or on and on and on, or these thugs come over and, push you around, or a lot of people have unpleasant experiences when they first go out of body. That's your fear. When your fear's gone, they're gone. See, that's you projecting yourself into that state, and you're running into these problems because of the basic fear that's inside. So the point consciousness is an awareness, but it's an awareness at the being level, and it is awareness basically without being self-referential, which means without ego, and without belief. Because if you have belief in that state, then that is what messes you up. Why do people go through tunnels? Because they have a belief that you have to, oh, there's the light. I see the light. I need to move toward the light. Well, how do you move? How do you have a sense of making progress? Well, there's two ways. The light can continue to get bigger, and then you can imagine yourself getting closer and closer to it. And another way is that you can actually see things passing by on the side, so you know that you're moving. So we create tunnels to go through, so we have this sense of going someplace. Because that's just a belief we have that if you don't move, you can't go anywhere. And that's the way it is here in this virtual reality. If the scenery doesn't change, then you're not moving. You're not going anywhere. You're still where you were, you see. So that's why we have to have tunnels to go through. Not that the larger reality is full of tunnels, but it's just that we manufacture the metaphor of a tunnel so that we get the metaphor of space and motion, because that's what we're used to.
So just to round that, I can put the question to rest in my head. It doesn't matter what form of meditation you choose.
It doesn't matter what forms of meditation you choose. And meditation is it's a personal thing. Some people like mantras, and they'll say a mantra. Well, what is a mantra? A mantra is a sound. It's a nonsense word. If it were something like ham sandwich, it would tend to focus you in on food. You see, so we need something that doesn't mean anything, has no no meaning in your language. It could mean something in somebody else's language. That's all right. It just doesn't mean anything in your language. And you just fill your mind full of that sound, and what you're doing, that's a trick, that's a technique for pushing all the other stuff out of your mind. Because if your mind is sitting there saying this, I shouldn't say saying, you're not really speaking it, but hearing this sound, then your mind is full of the sound, and all the other little stuff going on gets pushed out by the sound. So that's the technique, is to push out all the monkey mind or all the little chatter going on with something else that is benign, something else that doesn't connect you to something, see? So it's not like you're watching the movie, that connects you to the movie. Reading the book connects you to the book. The mantra connects you to this nonsense sound. It doesn't connect you to anything because it doesn't mean anything. It's just a sound. And anybody can make up their own mantra of any sound that just kind of like it, and they just put it in their head and it pushes everything else away. And then when you find yourself with a thought coming in, well, you just let the thought go and go back to the sound. So it's just a technique. You can do it with your breath, you see, being aware of your breathing. Well, that's not something that's really all that exciting. It's just not all that interesting watching, your breath go in and out, and after about 2 or 3 minutes of that, you're really bored with it. And when you get a thought, you say, thought, go away, back to the breathing, because the breathing is like the nonsense sound. It's just something that's non-operative. You're filling your mind with something you can't operate on because it doesn't really mean anything, or because it's boring, because it's so repetitious and doesn't really do anything. You can do that with art. You can look at a candle flame dance. You can look at a crystal ball. You can play music. You can just do nothing at all. You can just sit in some place that is maybe relaxing. Go out in a hill someplace, find a nice little rock, or don't sit down on it. It can maybe do the same thing. You can maybe listen to birds chirps. Now, if you're saying, I think that's that's a blackbird and that's a sparrow, and you start engaging your intellect to it, and it isn't going to work. But if you just let it all fade into the background, that's why it takes time, because at first your mind is grabbing at things, and then later it settles down very slowly, and eventually you let it go. So the meditation technique is not important, and eventually you let that go. Eventually you don't really do formal meditation anymore, because you really don't need it, because you've just learned to let it go. And then you find out that it doesn't take you a half an hour to relax your feet, and then relax your legs, and then relax the body, and relax your mind, relax your eyes. And you go through this whole thing of letting go, and half an hour later you're there. Well, you find out you can do that in, say, 2 or 3/10 of a second. You're just there. You don't need the ritual anymore. So meditation is a tool that you should use as long as you need it. And you should let go when you don't. Many people can't do that. They don't want to let go because they've learned the meditation is the thing you're supposed to do. So they'll get to a point where they're just blank. They've actually gotten to point consciousness, and they go, oh no, I messed up. I'm not saying my mantra anymore, you see? Which then pulls them back into where they were, and then they get back up to that point, and then they lose the mantra again, so they go back. So now they're just caught in this endless loop. And rather than just sitting in point consciousness, they're constantly looping between losing the mantra and having to get the mantra back. Well, when the mantra is when you're past the point where the mantra needs to push things away, let it go. Just exist in the void of point consciousness. So we don't have to hang on to that meditation any more than we need it. It's just a tool. And what Dennis and I found at Bob's is that there's this technology called binaural beats, which you can get for free on the internet. You can Google it, look up a site where you can make your own binaural beats. And you make the beat difference. You have 2 frequencies. The difference between them, like you subtract one from the other, and the difference between them is called the beat frequency. So if you have a 1000 or 1004, you get a beat frequency of 4 hertz. And that in around 4 hertz was just a really nice beat, because encouraged your brainwaves, your EEG, to dominate in 4 hertz theta state. Theta state's the state between being relaxed in alpha, being unconscious in delta. Theta's right in there between those two, which is a very productive state for letting go of things. So the 4 hertz binaural beat then is kind of a standard tool you can use to meditate. And what it does is it kind of nudges you into that meditation state. But just like the meditation itself, you have to know when to let it go. See, it is also, it not only will kind of nudge you, push you, it doesn't force you. You can lie there and listen to binaural beats and, and do math problems, or do your homework, or try to list all the things you need at the grocery store, and it won't, you'll still be in beta doing all those things. You can ignore it, but if you go with it, it will tend to nudge you into the theta state, which is a very productive state for point consciousness, for healing, for remote viewing, or anything else you want to do. So that's another tool. So some people don't say a mantra, don't do their breath, don't do anything else other than listen to binaural beats. It does the same sort of thing to you. So no, it doesn't matter at all. Anything that works for you is good, and actually you should branch out and try different things, because you'll be surprised. The things you will learn, like mantras and the breath, those are things that kind of generally work for most people. That's why they're used a lot. But there's lots of different ways you can modify those things. You can do them both. You can have a mantra and pay attention to your breath. And it's just a matter of what you get used to, which is another pit. Don't get trapped into rituals with your meditation. People start to meditate and they learn a process, it works for them, they get habituated to it, and now they're stuck. They can't get there without this process. And all the little details of that process seem to matter. So you learn to meditate lying down, then you have to go lie down or you can't meditate. Now that's a constraint. You learn to meditate sitting up, you've got to sit up. If there's only a place to lie down and not a place to sit, you can't meditate. You see, if you can only meditate when it's quiet, when it's dark, when you're alone, when you know there won't be any interruptions, if you have all of these constraints on your meditation, you're stuck with the constraints. You need to learn to be able to meditate under any kind of condition. Noisy, busy, quiet, turbulent, standing up, sitting down, lying down, standing on one foot, taking a walk. You need to learn to be able to get to that point consciousness state and still be functioning here. Still carrying on a conversation. Still walk in the park without walking, into a puddle or stepping in a hole. So that's a little parallel processing, and that comes too. So I kind of saying this with the question here about how do you meditate and the technique. Eventually you want to let all the techniques go. And just, nobody has to tell you when you read a book how to let go of your sense data. You just do, because you've replaced it with something else. Now all you have to do is really get that intellect to just sit down and be quiet, and you won't need the book. You can just let it go. So it's kind of a matter of being able to, I hate to use the word control, but it's really not so much control as it is becoming aware and acquainted with your own consciousness to the point that it's not just an on-off switch. There's a lot of other things can go on with your consciousness other than awake and asleep, on and off. There's a lot of gray areas between on and off that are very profitable for you to explore. And that just takes practice and time. And mostly your practice and time is at trying to get rid of your own rituals, trying to get rid of the things that you've learned, trying to get rid of your intellect interfering with your being level. So it's nothing really about technique as it is about letting go of all the stuff that gets in the way. Okay, you had a question.
When I'm in this let go state, or whatever you name it, transcendent state, I get to see a lot of stuff. You name it, other virtual realities, other settings, other rule sets. I get to travel to a lot of other virtual realities that have other rule sets. Like, for example, in this virtual reality, we are restricted with space, time. I get to see other things that they are not restricted by these rule sets. They're, for example, individuated units of consciousness, as you will, that they are not restricted with space. They can appear whenever, wherever they want. Or other individuated units of consciousness that they are not restricted with time. They can appear whenever they want. And so all these create a lot of questions. And I log back to my, this current virtual reality that we're living in. It just creates millions of questions for me, that how all these connect to each other. Because every set that I see, apparently it is intended to create a sort of information system to report it to a higher level system. And that information has a sort of feedback to create other rule sets again and again. And it's a sort of endless circulation that goes on and on and on and on. And how do we connect to them? How other consciousness systems create justice. By justice system, I mean how do they create for example, create the equal chances for the individuated units of their own consciousness system to grow up. And all these questions, when I log back, all these questions are in my mind. But I hit something very, pragmatic thing in my life that, okay, I have all these questions, all this information, but how do I get to connect this to the current society that I live in? How does it help me to grow up? Because that's the main part. How does it help me to help others? Because when I talk about this stuff that I see, it's just I make myself fool in there, in other people's eyes.
Sure.
And so I have to get it to a sort of pragmatic and practical thing to help the current challenges of this universe that I'm currently living.
Right.
And that's a very controversial thing for me at the moment. It's very hard to deal with because I don't find any way so that information that I get in that state helps me in this life. It doesn't do much. And this question just backfires me like, okay, that is your ego and enthusiasm only that wants to know all this stuff. And it's just not very practical. So I don't know how to get, overcome it.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. For the record here, the short version of that question is, what's really the value of the awareness of the larger conscious system, out-of-body awareness of other reality frames? How does this awareness and experience actually help you grow up here, help you become love? And the short answer to that is that it doesn't directly. It does indirectly. The point of being here is to grow up, is to become love, and that's about other people, not about zipping around in non-physical reality. It's about other people. It's about the choices you make here. It's about the level of caring and compassion that you have for other people. It's the quality of your choices that you make here. That's why we're here. Our reason for being here is because we get all these choices, all these interactions, all these things that tug at our ego, tug at our fears, and we need to outgrow that ego, outgrow that fear, and we're here to do that. We're not here primarily to learn how to go out of body. Going out of body or not is basically irrelevant to our growth in a direct way. So you're not going to take that experience that you experience outside of this physical reality and directly apply that here. They don't. They don't connect. There is no connection. Now, the indirect connection is that those experiences you have help you understand a bigger picture, help you see things in a more coherent whole, help you have a context of why you're here and what you're doing that you wouldn't have otherwise. And they do that in such a way that you know that reality is bigger than just this physical world, because you've been in that bigger reality. You've interacted with it, and if you've interacted with it enough, you know that it's a real, it's as real as this reality frame. It's just different. And you should have, in the beginning, done a lot of evidential stuff, things that convinced you that it is real and outside of you, not just things you make up in your mind. Okay, you do that with doing evidential things, things that you can do there that have effects here. Okay, so you do that a lot in the beginning, and after and once you come to the point, it's real, it's outside of me, then you kind of dispense with the evidential stuff and you just go interact and explore. So it's only good for you as far as it's broadening and gives you a bigger perspective in which you can actually see this reality more for what it is. It's a place to experience. It's just a place to experience. You can experience in the dream reality. You can experience in an out-of-body reality. And in those realities, you also are making choices, and those choices are also either good choices or not so good choices. They're either helping you evolve or they're dragging you backwards to de-evolution. It's the same all over. It really isn't any different. So we have reality A, B, C, D, and so on, and all of them we experience in. All of them we make choices in, and all of them we grow, evolve, or de-evolve based on those choices. They're just different. Well, this one, this physical reality where your avatar is, that's where the interaction, that's where the choices tend to grab hold of your ego and shake it. That's when things happen and you get upset, or you get angry, or you get sad, or you get depressed, and you have all these things going on. Those are your challenges to deal with that with love, to let go of that fear. So this is our main place. But we get a bigger picture of reality if we know there are other places as well. Okay, so the only thing that you're going to, well, I shouldn't say that. The things that you will get from your non-physical excursions out of this reality frame is, one, your bigger picture, two, a perspective that you can kind of put this reality in. Three, you probably get the idea that you're not so worried about death here anymore because you know this is just one of lots of reality frames. So it kind of takes that anxiety away, that fear. It's always good to get rid of fear, so that one goes away. And the other thing you probably notice happening to you, and most people do who take this path, that if you take this path sincerely, if you take this path at the being level, you're not just using it for some advantage, but you're just exploring, you take this path, that you start to change. You're not the same person. You start to realize that the quality of your choices is what's important, that caring, that love is at the core of what's going on here, that it's all about evolution and growing up, and you start to get that Not that somebody tells you that. It's not that some entity comes and tells you, you know, it's all about love. An entity might come and tell you that, but that's not the point. Just by exploring the larger system, you begin to change and become a more caring, loving, connected person, working out of the being level, less judging of other people, more just realizing that people just are the way they are, and you know, I have to make choices and live with them in peace. So it changes you. And that's probably the biggest thing it does, but it's indirectly. And for all of you here who've had experiences and you've been doing this for, you know, decades, that you've been involved in this experiencing the other reality, you will probably all tell me, every one of you, that you've changed a lot during that time. You've learned to see a bigger picture. You're more caring. You're more forgiving. You're more accepting than you were before you started doing this. And that's just a natural result of your bigger picture. As you get a bigger picture and can put yourself in perspective, well, then it's not necessarily all about you so much anymore. As your perspective gets bigger, you start seeing something that's bigger than you. And that is a little humbling, and it kind of puts you in a better perspective. And pretty soon you realize that the connections you have here are important, not so much for what they, you know, for what you get and give in the connection, but just in the interaction itself. The quality of the interaction is the key, not what that interaction produces so much. And all of that just happens that way. And as you come to places like this where you meet each other, okay, you're all here people who've been working in this larger reality system, you know, for probably years and years and years. And then you talk to each other, and wow, what a nice bunch of people, you know, and you meet so many really great people, and there's as much of the connection between you and other people that are here as there is connection with me and the things that I say. Because now you're suddenly surrounded by a whole bunch of people that kind of feel and think like you do, in the sense that they're caring, loving, nice people that are just nice to be around. And that energy of all of you starts to feed and combine, and this being here becomes kind of special as opposed to, say, watching it on YouTube, because you get to share in all the good energy that's here that you interconnect with while you're here, and the nice people you meet. So that's the advantage of it. It does help you grow up as an individual. Not because of anything you particularly learned, not because you saw this or saw that, but just what it's doing to you from the perspective you have on the world. And you know, it's always been that way. The people who never got more than 20 miles away from where they were born have a very, very provincial view on life, you know. The people who travel around the world and have been in dozens of different cultures just have a bigger perspective, and they become less critical, less has to be my way, because they see there's lots of different ways and they all work and they're all okay. Well, that's an eye-opener. Whereas if you never get out of town, this is the way it is, this is the way it has to be, and you become narrow-minded. You become unable to really empathize with other people in other situations, because if they're not doing it the way you're doing it, then something wrong with them. You see, now you become very judgmental. So you have a bigger perspective. It just helps make you be a bigger person. And that's what you get out of the out-of-body. It's not that you see these kinds of people here and those kind there, and there's various restrictions, and all that's kind of interesting, perhaps, but that's not where the value is. The value is just, and you know, people traveling do that. Well, you know, here's these people in China and these people, you know, in where else, you know, and maybe, you know, Polynesia, and there's people all over the place, and they're just all different. And that's interesting, but that's not really the value. It's not the intellectual stuff you get. It's how that changes you as a person, how that gives you a bigger perspective, and how that bigger perspective makes you a little more humble, a little more accepting, and a little bit more like you're feeling a part of something bigger rather than the know-it-all at the center. And that's the value. That's really the value of it. So you don't bring it back and apply it here, as you say. You bring it back and say, hey guys, I just went on a trip and I saw this and this and this. Well, all you're doing is telling them that you're insane, that there's something wrong with you, and that they should be real careful, you know, being around you because you're really, really weird. There's nothing that you're going to bring back.
That's right, but the real question is, how do I employ this better of me in the service of the society that I live in right now?
Okay, there's two ways to do that. One is that the first thing you need to do is grow yourself. Well, you're working on that, and you've had some changes. You have to get rid of your own fear. You have to always be working on that. So before you even think about going out and helping and being of service, you have to think about getting rid of your own fear, because in as much as you have fear, then you will have ego, you will have beliefs, and these will curtail what you can do for other people. They put limits on your ability to do anything else. So you work both together, but primarily you got to get rid of this fear. How do you find fear? How do you know that you have fear? Well, you know that you have fear if you ever experience anything besides joy, peace, and love. If your life is joy, peace, and love from when you wake up to when you go to bed every day, all day, then you probably don't have any fear. But if it's not, if you have anxiety, you get upset, you're annoyed by things, you have to have certain things a certain way. You know, you need quiet, you need this, you need these kinds of people, then you have fear somewhere, because that's the negative stuff. And the negative stuff you can always trace back to fear. Fear is hard to find if you just look for fear. So instead of looking for fear, look for ego. Anytime you feel something negative, anytime you're feeling anxiety, anytime you're feeling upset, annoyed, you know, those feelings, it's just kind of the way you feel, you know. It's just not the way it ought to be. They're not doing it the way they should. When you have those negative feelings, there's fear based in that. That's your ego. So trace that ego back to, why do I feel like growling at those people? Why do I feel they're just doing it wrong? Why am I annoyed? Why does that upset me? Why does that make me angry? And you'll find that there's a fear back here someplace that's causing you to react that way. You see, your reactions are all your choice. Every reaction of yours is your choice. There are other ways you could choose to react, but you react the way you do because of the way you are. And if you react with anger, the way you are is with fear, and that whatever that person did triggered your fear, which creates your reaction. So it's not like they made me feel angry. You choose to feel angry because you have fear. You see, so that's the first thing. Work on yourself. Get rid of that fear, because it limits what you can do for anybody else. After that, all you have to do is act natural. Because once you get rid of your own fear, it becomes about other people. It's not about you anymore. Fear is very self-centered. It's all about me. When you get rid of the fear, it's not about you. How can I help? What can I do for you? Oh, you look like I said something to you and I see you're getting a little angry with that. What can I do? Why, you know, is there some way I can reassure you or explain to you that, something make you feel better? So it'll take care of itself. Getting rid of your fear is the key. After that, just be you. And it's a very similar thing happened to me once, a long time ago, and a person said, how do I become a better parent? How do I know how to raise a child? How can I learn the right things to do so that I don't pass my own fears onto my child, that I don't, create problems that they'll have to work out later like my parents did for me? How do I become a really good parent? And my answer was, get your own head straight, get rid of your fear, and after that, just act natural. And everything you do that you act natural after you've gotten rid of the fear will be just the perfect thing that you and your child needs. So it's not that you have to, again, it's not a matter of process, learning a new skills of interacting with people. You can do that from the intellectual level. You can say, oh, you're an INTJ and you do things this way, and I'm an XYZK and I think this way, and here's how I can deal with you to make that, and that's all intellectual. You can do that, or you can just say, all right, I'm going to be a kind person because I know kindness is good. And I'll just look around, and when I see people that need help, I'll go help them. All of that's out of the intellect. You see, that's not growing. That doesn't really help you evolve. It makes you more civilized, it makes you nicer to be around, but it doesn't help you evolve the quality of your consciousness. That has to be out of the being level. You help people not because you think it's a good idea that you should. You help people because that's who you are. You see somebody that has a need and you just help them. It's not like, well, I should help them because that would be a nice thing to do. That's your intellect. You just do it because that's who you are. There's a difference there. One's acting, the other's being. You see? So if you get rid of your fear, then what you are, what's left over is love. You don't have to do anything to become love. All you have to do is get rid of the fear. And once you're love, all of your interactions will be optimal for everybody. So that's the thing to do. And you find that fear by finding that ego. And the best person, the best situation for finding that ego is with the people who know you best. It's probably your significant other, you know, your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever. The people who are close to you, they have ways of triggering that fear in a way that nobody else has. And that's because you're more open to them. You're deeper with them. It's more the real you connecting to them, not just the acting. You know, the people we go to work with, well, you know, that's just people we work with, and they can say things and they can even be rude, and we can just say, well, that's them, and we can blow that. But the people that we're really close to, now we're vulnerable and that hurts. And then when it hurts, we bite back and, you know, we do those kinds of things. So it's relationship is where most of the traction on you finding out about your fear and ego. And the deeper and more meaningful the relationship, the easier it is for that person or that relationship to get in and twist your fear button and set you off, and you will realize this is not joy and peace. And when you do, don't say, you made me, you know, angry. Say, I chose to be angry. Why did I do that? What's upsetting to me here? You're the only one you can fix. They are just who they are. They're struggling with their own fear and with their own ego. And you need to let them deal with their ego, and you need to deal with yours. And guess what? If you can deal with your fear, it makes it so much easier for them to deal with their fear. Because you can get rid of that ego best and get rid of that fear best if you're in a safe place where you can try new things. And there's no safer place than being in a company that's somebody that just loves you unconditionally. And that's what love is. It's all unconditional. If it's not unconditional, it's not love. So love only comes in one variety, and that's unconditional. So somebody loves you unconditionally, you can kind of stretch out and be yourself. You can go deeper into yourself because you don't have to be protective, you see. So other people will evolve as you evolve. That's why the best thing you can do to help other people is get rid of your own fear. And after that, your interactions that are natural will be perfect. And the fact that you're giving them an environment in which they can grow, that'll be helpful too. And it just spreads. So that's the thing. That's what you do, is you work on yourself. And a lot of people, when they look at themselves, of course, they're looking at themselves from their intellect, because their intellect's kind of taken over their cognitive function. And they say, well, I don't really know of any fears, and I don't have many beliefs. I gave up beliefs, some time ago, and there's nothing I really feel too frightened about. Well, that's just because your intellect is the last one to ask that question to. Your intellect knows less about what fears you have than probably any other, cognitive entity on the planet. So you're asking the wrong person. The intellect will say, fear? I don't have any fear. I don't have any beliefs. That's not the way to approach the problem. Other people can see that in you much easier than you can see that in yourself, because that's what the ego does. It justifies the way it is interacting with fear. The ego makes up stories that, well, okay, you got angry, but you should get angry in that situation. That was really rude, and anger was the right, there's nothing wrong with that. That's, they made me angry and they were just totally out of line, and anger is what they deserve. The ego will justify your choices, always. That's its role. You've got a fear, and that ego covers it up so that you don't have to deal with it. It justifies it so that you don't have to deal with it. So you can't depend on your intellect for telling you that. You have to say, oh, I don't feel right now full of peace and love. I feel kind of, hurt. Well, your fear. Not that the other person screwed up and hurt you. Your fear. That's where that hurt comes from. It's not them, it's you. Find it and fix it. Now, it's easy to say fix it. It's harder to do. Easy to say it, but first identify it. First find it, then own it. Yes, okay, I have this fear, and that is why I'm reacting this way. That's why I get upset when you say that. I get upset because I have this fear, and your thing triggers my thing, and then it's not healthy for either one of us. So realize you have it, own it. Realize that fear is what is, that fear is the hand up your back that makes you talk and makes you feel, That's the puppet strings, is that fear. And then once you realize that and accept it, then getting rid of it requires courage. You just have to catch yourself. That's your intellect saying, oops, I'm starting to get upset here. Not a good idea. Take a deep breath. Remember, that fear of being inadequate is just mine, and I just need to deal with that and let that go and calm yourself down. And then eventually, between your intellect helping you, because your intellect isn't something to throw out, you need that as a help too, but you can't just do it with your intellect. The intellect has to work with you at the being level to change you, not just to make you more civilized. Did that cover it? Yeah, okay.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for being here. I'm glad that I'm here. That was like a whole big thing on fear. I never had a problem in not knowing fear. I was always, from the moment that I can remember, I was always fear-based. So overtly fear-based and incredible. So I basically had a knot in my stomach for like half a century. And all my questions about like life, and I went in different directions. But like philosophers, religion, whatever, they couldn't really, I was always looking for something. And when I actually found you on YouTube, and I watched the Calgary thing, and then I started doing more work and getting really into it, and that was the first time in my life that someone had actually said something that I could relate to and that made sense. And it wasn't like, well, that's the way it is, like kind of, yeah, but, so, and a lot of things, then I bought the books, and I started reading them, and I had this profound dream afterwards, that I was walking down the street, and there was this, whatever, I don't know, it looked like people, but they were cats or whatever, it doesn't matter. But, I had this fear, and this thing spoke to me and said, there is no need for you to be fearful. And it said, look. That's all it said. It said, look. And I went into a void, which absolutely nothingness. There was nothing. And I came back out, and I knew that all my fears, all my life, were completely unnecessary. And I was crying in this dream. I was just weeping and weeping and weeping. And what was even more profound than the dream, and it really like moved me. And what was even more profound was one of the things you said in one of the videos. It's not about good, bad, right, or wrong. It's about, does it help you? Is it helpful to you? You know, because I would be obviously being so fear-based, I would be completely judgmental and know-it-all and have all the answers, and everything worked except for me. Nothing, you know, it worked on the surface. I held it together by sheer force or whatever. But inside, I was like a complete wreck. So now, you know, so like even in, you know, like this happened, and it was like such a profound dream, showing me no fear, and I've been kind of like living or going deeper into it. But now I made like some sort of like lifestyle change, and even though I know all this, and I'm even like in a very good place, I have this fear that wants to resurrect itself. I mean, I get these, you know, like second guessing, you know, all the things that you were talking about, second guessing. I get these dreams, oh, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have moved, I shouldn't have quit my job, I shouldn't have done this. And it's like, oh my God, it's really like clawing at me. You know, it's like it wants whatever, you know. So it's like I'm really struggling with this. And it's really powerful.
Yes, and struggling with fear is probably what most people do most of the time, their life. Being aware that that's what they're doing is much rarer. So the fact that you've been aware of it, it's probably been a little bit of torture for you, but it is also a very good sign. And it means you will probably get over it. You probably beat it, where these things stop pulling at you. The ego doesn't go quietly. It doesn't say, all right, you know, I guess I should get out of here because, you know, fear isn't a good thing. It fights back. And your fear doesn't let go of you easily. It keeps pulling at you. And it keeps getting more and more dramatic. Okay, if that little episode didn't put you into a fear attack, what about this? You know, and if you handle that one, then there's something else. You know, just the point that you say, well, I think this is over now. I don't think there's anything to bother me. And right at that time, somebody runs into the back of your car that you just own now for 2 weeks, right, and smashes it up. Well, you know, that's the way it is. Things will keep working at you for you to keep struggling with them. And you just have to keep struggling with them. But you will notice that they get less and less. It'll get worse for a while because the fear's fighting back, but if you hold strong and you just say, no, I'm not going to let that fact that I just got rear-ended and this is a brand new car upset me. Things like this happen. Cars can be fixed. It's going to be all right. And you go back and you talk sanely without gritting your teeth to whoever it was that wasn't paying attention. And you know, you process the whole thing and it's like, it's okay. It can be fixed. And you take it to the shop and you wait and you get over it. So it just takes time. And what you have done that's made it very difficult is instead of picking on a fear and working on that fear, you take them all on at once because you were aware of them all at once. I've got all of this fear, it's dominating my life, I need to get rid of it. So you're trying to get rid of all of it all at the same time. That takes longer and it takes a lot more, you know, a lot more effort on your part to do it. The way I would recommend that people do it, and mostly these are the people that don't know they have any fear, unlike you. And then they start looking into it. They start saying, well, this upsets me, why? And they find a fear. Oh, this makes me angry, why? Well, they find a different fear. And pretty soon, I get this report mostly from young guys who tell me they don't have any fear and they don't have any beliefs. Not me. That's not my problem. And then I say, well, work on it. You know, if you ever feel negative about something, you know, find back. And then I hear from them 6 months later, and it's like, oh my God, I'm driven by fear. I don't do anything except as I'm driven by fear. My whole life is informed by my many fears, beliefs, and they realize that they are a walking ego that's full of fear, and it's overwhelming. And I generally tell them, pick a fear. Pick something that upsets you, maybe something that gets you angry or makes you really annoyed, something that happens daily in your life, like the rude people on the subway or whatever it is. Just deal with that. Get rid of that fear. And once you've gotten rid of that fear, that may take you a year to get rid of that fear, or 2 years. But once you've done it, you've seen the process. Yes, I accept that it's me, that it's my choice, that I feel that way, and you work your way out of it. And the second fear you can do much easier. And the third is easier yet. And then pretty soon you can get these things up and struggle with them for a day or two and dismiss them. It becomes easier and easier as you go. So you're just taking them all on at once, and you're gonna, just gonna clean the system out, and when you're done, you're done. It can be done that way, and it's just hard. So I'd say you're on the right track, you're doing the right thing, and yes, they still come up. But as they come up, you just basically tell them, I'm not playing. I'm not going to react that way. I don't feel that way, and here's why. And you can say, these people that were rude, it's not about me. It's about them. They're struggling with fear. I don't have to get upset because they're having an issue with their fear. Not about me. So then all suddenly things that all seem personal aren't personal anymore. And when they're not personal anymore, then it's a lot easier to deal with them with grace and understanding than if it's personal, you see. And so you're on the right track. Just keep working at it. And as you feel these fears, as the knots tighten up in your stomach, just take a break and say, relax, let that go. This is going to be all right. Doesn't necessarily matter. You see, again, we have these ideas of things that have to happen. Talk about, should I have sold the house? Should I have, taken that job instead of this job? I have all these things where you're second guessing yourself and whatever. It's not what you do that is really that important. It doesn't matter whether you took this job or that job, or, married this woman or that woman, or had 3 kids or 6 kids or no kids. These are all big things in your life, but it really doesn't matter. You can do either one of those jobs and learn from it. You see, there is no situation that you can't learn from. So you look at all of them and you say, well, yeah, maybe it would have, in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have sold that house, or maybe I should have held out for, another $10,000 because, gee, I didn't know. Instead of kicking yourself, saying, well, that's on my path. I'll learn something from that and go on. And now instead of it being a horrible thing that happened to you, it's this learning opportunity that you took advantage of on your path. So it's the path that's important. It's what you do day to day in your choices, not exactly where those choices take you, you see? So that's a kind of a key idea. We tend to put a lot of our energy on what we do and very little of our energy on why we do it. And if we think more about our intents than about the endpoints, then a lot of our anxiety will just drop away, because the fact of where you end up, okay, I end up at this address instead of that address, or I end up marrying this lady instead of that lady, or I end up with or without children. These things happen. I end up with a car that's whole, or a car that's just had the rear end all messed up on it. These things happen. And you just say, well, what happens isn't really that important. What's important is, how do I deal with it? How do I deal with whatever happens with caring? Oh, I sold my house too cheap, or I paid too much for this one. You can do all those things, but they're all learning opportunities. They're done. Accept them, learn from them, and go on. You'll get better and better at the doing if you stop trying to manipulate the doing to be optimal. Eventually you find out that you really don't have any control. Things just happen. You don't know. You don't know whether this job or that job, which one's going to work out. You really don't know because you don't have this crystal ball that'll tell you where this one's going to lead in 5 years and where that one's going to lead in 5. This one may look really, really great, and you may lose your job, 6 months later because the contract goes away. So you don't know. And almost every decision you make that's important, like which job should I take, who should I marry, how many children should I have, all these important decisions are all made with no information. They're all made without any idea of where that's going to lead. Well, the key here is to give up trying to figure it out and making that perfect decision that's going to pay off, 5 or 10 years later. Just make the best decision from your intuition and your mind thinking about it, and you make a decision. And once you make it, own it, it's yours, and the adventure is to see what happens next. And I'll deal with that as it happens next. That decision's gone. Now I deal with the results of that decision. All right, I decide to marry Susie instead of Ann. Well, all right, now it's Susie and I that's going to have a lot of choices to make. Ann's not in the picture anymore, or maybe she's still a friend, but it's different. Had you gone the other way, now your choices were going to be with Ann or with this other job. So you make your choices and then you deal with it, and don't worry really where it takes you, because where it takes you is going to change. One thing will lead to another. And if you stop worrying about where it goes and just meet it with love and caring, it almost always works out really, really well. You find out it really works well. And, I'm glad I sold that house then. Yeah, it was undersold, but wow, it would have taken me 6 months to get more out of it. And because of that, I got this other really sweet deal because I was right there at the right time, you see? And you find that everything just works that way. To pretty soon, you try to control nothing. You just move with the flow of life, making the best choices you can at the time, and realize that everything that happens thereafter is an opportunity to learn and will take you someplace else. And your life just moves and bounces through. But meanwhile, you're always trying to care. You're always trying to make your best choice. You know it's you, it's not other people. You're trying to deal with your fears. And that will optimize not only your growth, but it'll optimize actually what happens to you. I found that out, I don't know how many years, decades ago, actually. And it was just really amusing to me when I realized that once you let go of control, you stop trying to control things. You stop trying to make them come out the way you know are best and you hope that they'll come out. Everything starts to come out really good. The reason it was coming out so bad before was because you were trying to control it. And it was the control that was driving you nuts because you wanted it to go this way and it went that way. You've got this anxiety, you got this upset, and and when you're like that, you're growling under your breath, you don't make good choices. You compound a bad choice with another bad choice. And it just goes on like that. And this thing leads to the next, and every one of them makes you growl. And your whole life seems to be full of pain and full of unhappiness and bad situations. And it's not my fault, this stuff just happens to me, and you realize that it is your fault. You are creating this negative outcome because of the way you're approaching life, because of the way you want to control it. You want to make it good so bad that you make it bad because you want to control it. So you got to let go of that. What's it going to happen? Did I make the right decision? It is what it is. Own it, accept it, deal with it with love and with caring, and let it take you wherever it takes you. Let those chips fall wherever they do. And if you go through life like that, for some reason, all the chips always fall in a really nice pattern for you. And it just works out really good. Yes.
Hi, Thomas. My name is Sonia, and I was introduced to you by John here. I myself, just give an introduction. I've watched TV for over 16 years, nor do I do the internet. I don't have a computer. I had a near-death experience at the age of 2. I studied the Eastern religions, starting with Byzantine Rite. Then I went on to the Roman Catholic, studied that also of Islam. And I studied with the Brahmins for over 15 years. Since 1997, I became a student of the Brahmin Kumaris. And you can kind of become like a traveler, becoming a state. But I'm at a point in my life right now, and talk about fear. I was blind for over 6 months, and I woke up completely blind, and then I was paralyzed for a year at the age of 32. We were living in a nursing home. No mother, no father, because they had passed away. I was alone, and I tell people that fear is like the devil on your back, or the troll, not to feed it, not to feed fear. I talk to people on the street who are homeless. I ask them, what's your story? I want to know your story. And that is the truth about fear. Fear is the troll, or a devil, whatever you call it. You don't feed into it. What I did at that point in time, I shut myself off. I had people come pray over me. I had shamans come and do blessings. And the minute I just let go of the attachments of fear, the attachments of what you're used to and trained to believe, and then I ended up opening myself up to what was of love. And I was healed. And now I'm in a stage in my life now here. I have 4 service birds. We've been going for the last 6 years to nursing homes and hospices and helping people pass away. They're registered with the government, and I just came back from Saskatoon yesterday. And I have a brother who had a massive brain aneurysm. He died on arrival. They brought him back. For 2 months, he was in ICU. Then he was in a rehab center for helping with his head paralysis. And then we ended up transferring him to Saskatoon, my brother and sister are. So I go there twice a year with my birds, and I'm at a table with him and all these other gentlemen who have had brain injuries. Some of them were engineers, some of them, studied physics and so forth. And I just turned 50. And so for me just now, before I left, I remember washing my floor. I was washing my hand. When I got up, I looked at my house, how clean it was, and looked and I go, oh my God. I might not be here someday, but my floor will be nice and clean, my house will be here, and everything else will be here, but I won't be here. So when I went to the nursing home, that was something that had been bothering me, and I think your subject should be about void today, because listening to this gentleman and then listening to you and talking about the void, the black void, well, what had happened was, this has been something that I've been thinking about, what happens after death, after we leave this consciousness, which I call our soul, because to me the consciousness is your soul. And I ended up going into a state of meditation because, again, like I said, I've studied that. It's like riding a bike. You don't know how to ride a bike until somebody teaches you. You can't just say to a small child, go ride that bike. So I've been studying how to meditate and so forth. And for myself, I let myself go that evening at the nursing home when I went and laid it down. And I allowed myself to allow my body to die, to let go, and to go into that another realm. And when I let go, I was in brilliant bright lights, like the universal bright lights of the universal stars. But what happened was, once my consciousness was in that light, it dissipated. And I became into a black void. And I was in a void, but I was in an infinite void, a black void. And I was aware and conscious that I was in an infinite void. And I thought, oh my God, when you die, you become into eternity, into a black void. And I screamed, and I said, this is not where I want to be. This is not what I want. Because just like with the avatars, you're not born alone. You just don't come into this world alone. You're born with parents, and you're with other avatars. You, as a consciousness, need other avatars because you cannot function. You cannot. I can be alone and be by myself, and I can meditate by myself. I can find peace within myself. Okay, I myself, I connect with animals. I'm very big with animals. I don't have to speak to animals, but I feel them. I feed stray cats outside now and realize I've been feeding a skunk instead of a stray cat, just, you know. But that skunk does not spray me. I came into contact with that skunk, and it's actually, I've had rescued crows actually and brought them into my house. And they come back to the house because, to visit actually, because they have families. So for me, I'm at that point now in my life, in that stage, and I think we're all at different stages. That's why you cannot make judgment of other people because they might not be at that stage as you are. People haven't had the experience that I have had experiences. And getting back to your personality, sometimes that becomes who you are, but that's not your true being. Your true being is not that. It is of love. It is a flame of light. That is your true consciousness. And what I've traveled, where I've journeyed. But this is what I'm trying to ask is that what happens after death? That's what I like to know. I don't want to be in a black void. That's not where I want to be. I would like to be, but I'd rather be with other avatars or with other consciousness in the black light than just to be alone. And that's why I think there is a reincarnation. You do come back. You do want to. You have a wantingness to come back because you don't want to be just alone. That's where I think you're such a treat with a black void someplace. Because even a gentleman at the nursing home, he used to be a teacher at one of the universities, and he had a stroke. This gentleman, he's about 70. And he told me there's no such thing as an atheist. He says, because in the end, everyone believes in something. You can ask an atheist. He says, in somewhere, they believe in something, even if it's science, you still believe in something. So I just want to know, what are your experiences of that? Because that's where I'm going now with my stage.
Okay, the void is not where you end up when your avatar dies. You don't end up in a void. That would mostly just scare people. Yeah, so that's not what happens. What happens, that void is just a kind of a place to go to let go of the physical. That's what you're left. When you let go of the physical, you're left in the void. Okay, but now when you are transitioning, your consciousness, you're immortal. You're not the avatar. Okay, you're totally immersed in this avatar, and all of your experience that you know that you've ever had has been with this avatar. So you tend to identify with that avatar, right? You think that avatar is you, but it's not really you. It's just your consciousness is you. All right, when you die, you are going to, recycle, if you like. You are going to end up with another avatar sometime because that's kind of the name of the game, is growing up, becoming love. Okay, now the process to do that is that the first thing is that you have to be put at ease. Okay, your avatar's just died seconds ago. Now, you no longer have that avatar defining your reality. Otherwise, that avatar, what it interacts with is what you as consciousness are interacting with. So it's that avatar interacting with other avatars inside the rule set that's defining your reality. You see reality the way that avatar would see reality if it could see. It's just numbers in a computer, but you are having all of the experience that it would have interacting with others in this rule set. Now that's gone. So you don't have any way really to define your reality anymore, because that data stream that you were getting about what this avatar was seeing, feeling, whatever, you don't get that anymore. So that data stream's shut off. And what you do is you don't find yourself in a void. You find yourself in something that would be very much dreamlike. You just find yourself existing, but not in a black, scary place like the void. You find yourself existing just anywhere, like in space. You're just here. You don't really care too much about your surroundings. You look around, and very quickly you will see something that will be friendly and that will be beckoning you this way. Solutions over here, and you will feel very drawn to that light. So, and you'll feel very at peace with that light. You'll feel the love and the caring of that light, and you'll move toward it. That's the classical near-death experience of moving toward the light. You know, that's the way a lot of people experience it. Okay. Now, the light is a metaphor. Just like if you move through a tunnel, that's a metaphor. So you can make up some metaphors to make you feel more at ease with where you are and what you're doing. But the whole point of this transition, virtual reality, is to put you at ease, to make you feel comfortable, to let you relax and let you forget, let you let go of the past experience that you just had. Because if you're back attached to that, no, I wasn't ready to go, no, I hadn't done this yet, or I hadn't done that, or I need to see how this comes out. If you have a lot of attachments to that, that just gets in the way. That avatar experience is done. So now you need to move on. So this virtual reality that you will get into, and it's another virtual reality. This is a virtual reality. Your transition reality is another virtual reality. Your dream reality is another virtual reality. Anything that's experiential, you know, in which you have experiences, is a virtual reality. And your experiences are the data that you get in that virtual reality according to the rule set that defines that reality. The rule set that defines this transition reality is one of peace, calmness, you're taken care of, let go, let's focus next on what we're going to do next. But nobody's pushing you. Nobody's saying, you know, hurry up, you know, we got to get you into another body or anything like that. And if you feel a little traumatized by the last one, you can just say, no, I'm not ready yet. You have free will. Nobody can force you to do anything that you don't agree with. So it's up to you. And basically the way the thing works is that they're going to let you feel like you're in a safe place, but eventually you start getting bored in that safe place. You're wondering, well, okay, this is nice, and people have been very nice, and I've done this, and I've done that, but what else? You know, I'm feeling like I need a little bit more. And as you get that sentiment expressed, then you'll get the idea, well, you know, something more would be, would you like to, you know, have another avatar, you know, get back in the game, but you're not really presented as a game, you know, would you, you know, like to, you know, get re-involved with things rather than just kind of be here? You want to get involved, connect with people, you know, experience, and most everybody says, of course, you know, I just don't sit around here, you know, feeling comfy. I mean, it's nice, but there's got to be more to this than sitting around feeling comfy. So then you get set back up with another avatar, and you get another free will awareness unit, and bam, there you are. You know, some doctors get you upside down by the feet, you know, just smack you, you're crying, you know, or you're maybe still in gestation for the last couple of months, you know, and you're getting little bits of light, and you're hearing voices, and whatever. But you start then, and you start a whole new series of experience where you're totally immersed and identified with now that avatar. And that's another lifetime. So this transition place that you will go through when this avatar dies is one of comforting, making you feel safe, and basically letting you be until you're ready to get back to another lifetime. And when you're ready, then fine. And I hear any number of people who've been struggling mightily. Of course, they're totally unaware that their struggle is mostly centered around their own fear and ego and sort of things, but they blame it on everything else. And they live in an awful place. You know, this reality is a hellhole of the worst sort. You know, the governments are bad, and you know, the people are bad, and there's evil and nastiness everywhere, and I went out and I don't ever want to come back here. And if I ever get out of here, nobody's going to make me come back. And they have these attitudes because they blame everything that's wrong in their life on somebody else. So it's everybody else's fault, and they don't want to come back here with all these people that make them miserable. But that all disappears. That goes like a bad dream. Maybe it was a nightmare for them, and it too passes. And they too also feel, well, there's got to be something more. You know, what else can I do? And they get back into the game. Nobody's forced to. So it's all gentle. It's all meant to make you feel fine. A lot of times, relatives are the first ones to meet you. People that you care about. People that mean something to you. Or maybe birds that mean something to you. that have passed on, or whatever means something, whatever makes you feel, oh, they're here too. Well, that's nice. Whatever makes you feel relaxed. And then as soon as you kind of relax and let go, these other people, they'll say, well, I got things to do now. I'll see you a little later. And they kind of disappear, and that's all right because they've comforted you. And now you feel like it's a safe place. So it's all about safety, security, letting go, and getting ready to do it again. Never forced, never pushed. When you're ready, you make the initiative, and then you'll find others there that will be helpful, that will help you decide what would be a good avatar next time, what would be a good situation, the kind of things that you need to learn, and you can go through all of that too. So there's a lot of helpers there, but mostly they're in the background. Mostly they're letting you decide. Nobody's trying to sell you anything. So it's not an unpleasant thing at all. Now the people, when I mentioned before, hand-holding, the people who come in with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, they need more hand-holding. They need more things to distract them. So they get a lot of attention. Those people who come through like, yeah, I know, I've been here before. Let's go figure out where I'm going to go next. Well, they don't need any hand-holding. They process through just without even slowing down. So then it's just a matter of working out what were the mistakes I made? What were the key things that I needed to learn in this? Help me find those. And that process is available too. You can see your whole life in retrospect. And you can see those things that you couldn't see then when you were in it. You can see them from outside of it. And you can realize kind of the things you need to learn and where you kind of went down the wrong path and what led where. So you're more aware of that now when you go back into your next one. And partly that's where our intuition comes from, when we just kind of get to a point and we say, I'm not sure why, but I don't really want to go that way. And part of that's because in your mind, before you ever got here, you're thinking, that's what I did last time. I don't want to go that way.
And it's that transition because for me, it wasn't, when I went in a second seizures, and obviously you wake up in the light, but I can't seem to handle see great light. My body's paralyzed basically. I can't move my body, I just can't. And for me, when I let go of my body and I learned how to, let go, let go of attachments and so forth. But when I let go of my body and I was in the light and I was in space and I had all these beautiful stars and all these lights, I was comforted, I was fine, I was good. And once I got to that black void, but being there alone, and that's why consciousness cannot be alone, the soul cannot be alone, it has to have interactions, it has to be interacting, engaging, because when I was alone, things were like, a lot of things, and I realized, I know what I was, I realized that I was in this black void.
Yeah, so some people get frightened by the void, but you can be alone. Consciousness can be alone, but if you have a fear about abandonment or that sort of thing, it comes out roaring when you get into that point consciousness state. And a lot of people almost panic when they get in there because it is very, very alone. But if you don't have that fear, then you don't notice it as really being alone. You just notice it that you are just a point of consciousness. But consciousness in general, you're quite right, is a social system. Consciousness isn't about just individuals, it's about individuals interacting. So the main thing going on with consciousness is interaction, because it's through that interaction is how you grow up. So relationship is key. Consciousness are individuated units of consciousness in a social system with each other. So that's where your learning takes place. But without the fear, the void is not a threatening place. The void can be just a relaxing place. A lot of people who go into the void don't want to leave it because it is so, it's a similar thing to being out in that primal forest, sitting on a stump and next to a waterfall with butterflies flying around and fish jumping in the lake. It's that kind of a thing. It is so totally peaceful with no distractions, nothing, that many people say, I don't want to go back. I just want to hang out here for a while. It's just the most peaceful place I've ever been. Other people I know, particularly if they've had kind of abandonment issues or things like that in their past, they get there and they're immediately terrified because they're so alone. It's just, so that's just you. That's just you and where you are, and probably a fear that you have that being alone isn't something that you like, isn't something you accept and can deal with very well. But not a problem. You will get, when you pass, you will get something that suits you, something that does suit you. You won't be stuck in a void or anything else. It will be warm and welcoming and friendly, and you won't have any of that. And as you get more self-confidence and you let whatever fear you have, you can even go into that void and just experience it as deep peace and not be threatened by it at all. You don't think, oh, am I going to be stuck here for a long time with nothing? You see, that's a fear. That's a fear.
As you go into it, it's funny because when I was at the nursing home, I asked them, fellas there, I was afraid of death. And the majority of them, except my brother, he just came out to me with that experience. They were all afraid of fear. They all, because it was the unknown. They were afraid of not knowing. And that was the thing, and that's what it was, is the unknown of it. And I've always said, I've made peace within myself, I've made peace with my maker, and I'm at peace. But once I got to that last void, that's where I was not at peace.
Yeah. Well, that's not really a big deal, and that won't help. That won't be a problem for you. That won't be a big deal, and the whole thing there about the void is not really that important. It's okay. You can just be however it is you are, and it'll all work out. It'll all work out just fine. Yes, ma'am.
I did research after experiences in about 100 cases. I've worked Dr. And one of the things that blew me away was that no one read as spirit or as consciousness. They all took their personality and ego with them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's who they are. See, that personality and ego and fear, that's consciousness. That's not. Yeah.
They didn't leave as they didn't turn into spirit. They kept their personality and the fears and the fears, and so they produced your death experience. That was right from them.
And then that's why when I came back to that, and I went, oh, that's what happens. But I was met by someone, but not a human form. It was an alien form, and I said, I screamed, I said, want to go back, and want to do it, and so I did.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
No, you didn't.
Oh, sorry. Further to that, Tom, when we get to the transition stage, a little bit of dichotomy that I've noticed, at least myself, in NBT, is that you mentioned from time to time that we let go, we do forget this reality. We take with us our fundamental growth.
Right.
When we make the decision to transcend back into a PMR, we do some planning, and you've also mentioned that we can do it with others.
Yes.
So I don't know if that is a dichotomy, or because I know from Sonia and I, from our experience, we had a very interesting meeting and a lot of coincidences, and in retrospect looked like, in your term, nudging, a lot of nudging to get together. And I know you said that was maybe similar to it with you and Pam as well. Right, a lot of post-recognizing. So is that fundamental at that stage where you would do that, or is that something that's
no. That's an option you have. Now, the more that the more incarnations that you've had, the more times you've gone through this process, and the more that you've grown up, the more likely it is that you will plan something for next time. If you're right at the beginnings, you're in, you're out, you just need experience. Okay, so the further down this path you go, not only do you start planning, well, I need something that'll help me deal with my anger issues, but you also realize that there are some individuals that are really good together about helping each other grow. You know, they make good connections. This person just brings stuff out in me. So you make a kind of an effort to connect with that person again, because you tend to help each other. You make good team, you know, it's that sort of thing. And that way people, sometimes groups of 3 or 4 or 5, but often 2, you know, kind of make an arrangement to have this shared interaction when they incarnate. And when they do, they're often given certain kinds of I don't know, it's like a filter, like a resonance. So when they meet that other person that they have that connection with, it's just, you know, and there it is, and there's a connection right away, and there's no rationale for it, it just is. And that's because that was something that they have been pre-programmed, if you will, to resonate with that person that way.
And vibration as well as the law of attraction. Could you be familiar with them?
Well, yeah, sure. Now the law of attraction is a completely different thing. It's a different idea and really a different concept. This concept is that you do get to plan, and you can plan with other people. But usually that's more after you've evolved to a certain point where the planning makes sense. Because, you know, a lot of planning doesn't have to happen, free will. So you may have a plan, and there's lots also of randomness, things that just go on. So that person may be a part of your plan, may have caught the creeping crud early in life and not here anymore. Or maybe they moved to South Africa, you know, and you're still in New York. And things happen. So the plans don't always work, but they tend to be nudged. Well, maybe you get a nudge to go to South Africa too, you see, or something. It just suddenly then your intuition, that just seems the place you need to be. So those kinds of things can take place. But they are more in, you know, they're more in the margin. They're more in the 10%, 5%, 3% kind of thing than they are in the 80%. Most people are just here, and they are interacting, and they form relationships, they develop everything, and it's not necessarily a plan.
Really what Sonia's saying about the law of attraction, could you speak to how intent has a factor on that?
Yes, I can, but I've just been told by Beth that we need to take a break. Yeah, and do that, Beth. I'm just up here talking, so whenever we have to go someplace or do something, just come up and say, attention, we got to do something else now.